Welcome to the Belize Caribbean Focus. This is the first in a series of programs that will examine the social, cultural, economic and political challenges which faces the indigenous people of the Caribbean and Central American region. Today we have a very special guest, Mr. Ray Hooker. Mr. Ray Hooker is a member of the Nicaraguan National Assembly. He's a congressman. He represents the Bluefields area on the Atlantic coast of that country. Welcome to our studios.
It's good to be with you today.
Maybe we can begin by giving us a historical overview of the makeup of the Bluefields area on the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua.
Bluefields has lots in common with Belize, historically, culturally, and in terms of our present situation. It was the Spanish in 1502, Christopher Columbus's fourth and last voyage, who reached the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua first. But the Spanish never established or exercised sovereignty over the Atlantic region of Nicaragua. They did not find the readily available type of wealth which they were looking for in our region. They found it in the Pacific region, and that's where they established themselves, exterminating to a great extent the Indian cultures inhabiting that region of present-day Nicaragua. It was the British who in the 1630s began to systematically colonize this region and to establish control over the Atlantic region of Nicaragua. Britain wanted to diminish the power of Imperial Spain, so she tried to achieve control over strategic areas of Central America. Belize, for example, the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua, Limón in Costa Rica. In other words, she wanted also to control the possible site of an interoceanic canal, which from the very beginning Europeans were convinced that should be built. Now, what Britain did was to try to establish peaceful and friendly relations with the Indian population living in our region. In our region, when the Europeans first arrived, three groups of Indians lived: the Miskitos, the Sumos, the Ramas. Now, Britain tried to establish peaceful relations with this population, not because of ethical considerations. What Britain wanted to do was to try to utilize this population to help it to diminish the power of Spain. Now, how did Africa make its appearance in our region? We have three historical proven instances in which African slaves were able to take over the boats which were transferring them against their will from West Africa to slave plantations in the Caribbean and in other parts of South America. They took over their boats, they were able to establish themselves in the Atlantic region of Nicaragua. They had a problem though, they did not speak the same African language. The owner of African boats, of African slave boats, made it their business to put on their boats as cargo Africans speaking different languages from different tribes. In this way, you see, they diminish the possibility of an uprising on their boats. Now, so it is this mixture of population which took place on the Atlantic coast which today represent the ethnic complexity which we have in our region.
What is the percentage of the population presently?
The non-Spanish speaking population of Nicaragua make up some 10% of the total population of the country. In our region, the non-Spanish speaking population make up 45%. That is the Miskitos, the Sumos, the Ramas, the Garifunas. The Afro-Caribbean population of our region make up 45%. The Spanish-speaking population now make up approximately 55% of our total population. There has been an intense migration of the Spanish-speaking campesinos from the Pacific region of Nicaragua to our Atlantic region beginning in the 1950s.
There was a radical feature in the legislation, the autonomy legislation. Describe what was the objective of that legislation and how it will affect the people of the Atlantic Coast region.
Okay, let's try to get to it. As I've said, the British established themselves in our region. They tried to utilize the population of the Atlantic coast to help them to diminish the power of imperial Spain. They inculcated into the people of our region anti-Spanish, anti-Catholic feelings. Now the Spanish did the same thing in the Pacific region with the people inhabiting in that region. They inculcated into the Spanish-speaking population hatred and mistrust of the peoples of the Atlantic region. This negative colonial heritage continued up until 1979. You know, the Pacific region of Nicaragua got her independence in 1821. The Atlantic region continued as a British protectorate up until 1894. In 1894, the Nicaraguan government organized an expedition to try to conquer our region. We were able to expel them from our region. The following year, they got the United States Navy to help them. With the help of the United States Navy, they were able to conquer our region. That was 1894. So in effect, we from the Atlantic region of Nicaragua became the colony of a colony, because Nicaragua up until 1979 was a colony of the United States. In Nicaragua, it was the United States ambassador who decided what was to be done in Nicaragua. So up until 1979, we, the population of the Atlantic coast, were second-class citizens in our country. With the revolution, we tried definitely to change that situation, and we have accomplished some important steps.
Well, let's look at the advent of the Sandinista revolution in 1979. What were the hopes of the people of the Atlantic Coast region? And if you can elaborate on the legislation on autonomy, what does it mean for the people of the Atlantic Coast?
Okay. Look, the people of the Atlantic Coast did not take part in the military struggle to overthrow Somoza. The people of the Atlantic Coast felt that this was a war between two Spanish-speaking groups. that whoever won, we would be the losers. When the revolution triumphed in 1979, the people were at first pleasantly surprised by the programs which the new revolutionary government tried to establish. It was a program which tried to benefit all Nicaraguans. But the problem with the program was that it was the same both for the peoples from the Pacific region as for the peoples from the Atlantic region. Now you can't apply the same program to people with different cultural background, people with a different history, people with a different interest. We insisted with the Frente that this program was not going to work. They did not believe us. They were in the majority. The program was put into effect. It did not work. Then, through a process of self-evaluation within the structures of the revolution itself, we came to the conclusion that something new had to be tried out. And that's when we began in late 1984 to put our autonomy program into effect. What the autonomy program tries to do and tries to guarantee for our people is that in the region where we live, the English-speaking population, the Miskito, the Sumo, the Rama, the Garifuna, the Spanish-speaking people, that we will enjoy equality of rights with all of the people of Nicaragua. But more importantly for us, that we will be electing our own leaders in honest, fair, free elections.
So is this calling then for self-government?
Sure, a degree of self-government which we have never had before. It's not calling for independence, but a degree of self-government which we have never had before. In other words, that we, to a great extent, would be handling, for the first time in our history, our own affairs. Not only politically, but also economically. That is, that the natural resources of our region would be handled by us. Not to benefit the president of the country or some foreign corporations, but to benefit the peoples of the Atlantic region. You know, before this program was put into effect, the exploitation and the benefits derived from our natural resources went to the owners of foreign companies operating in our region, devastating our region, or to the rulers of the country. So in this respect, the legislation was definitely positive.
The Atlantic Coast region also suffers from another problem, migration. Can you give us a picture of how this migration affects or affecting that region and neighboring Belize, the country of Belize?
In 1894, when Nicaragua, with the help of the United States Navy, conquered the Atlantic region where we live, 98% of the population of our region was non-Spanish speaking. In 1940, the Spanish-speaking population of our region had reached more or less between 10-15%. Today, the Spanish-speaking population of our region is more than 55%.
Is this because of the local people leaving the area or an influx of immigrants to the region?
We have two situations which has been affecting our region. There is an outflow of people from our region, our brightest and best,
heading north.
Some go to the United States if they can get visa. Some go to Managua, where there are more jobs and better paying jobs than in our region. This pattern is only now being reverted. Others will go to other countries of the Caribbean or other places in Central America. But the situation is that our most talented individuals are abandoning the region, and abandoning the region massively. The other situation which we have is the big landowners before 1979 tried to take away practically all of the land from the small farmers. They took away the land from the small farmers. The small farmers did not have where to plant crops on. So many of them headed towards the Atlantic region, where we have had an abundance of land. So you've had this mass inflow of landless Spanish-speaking campesinos who between the 1940s and 1979 now make up 55% of the total population of our region.
I mentioned that point because there is a commonality there with the immigration problem in the country of Belize, where the natives are leaving and there's a massive flow of neighboring people from the various countries in Central America coming towards Belize for the utilization of the land resources. But maybe we can go on to looking at some of the national concerns of Nicaragua. And the first question I have in regards to that is the last election. What went wrong?
I don't know if the way you phrase your question is the right way. In Nicaragua, the situation over the past decade has been a difficult one. It's never easy to carry out a revolution. It's a very, very difficult undertaking, because what you're trying to do really is to sculpt, to create the better woman, the better man. You're trying to bring into being a better society. Now, this has always been difficult. Throughout history, it has been so. In our case, it was much more difficult because beginning with the Reagan administration, the United States government committed lots of its resources, its military resources, its economic resources, its financial resources, its technical resources, its diplomatic resources, its political resources to destroy the possibility of building, of constructing a better society for our children, our children's children. It was a savage war, and it was savagely carried out. In the region where I am from, every single town, beginning with Bluefields, at one time or another, was attacked or occupied. The Contras were not able to hold on to these areas which they occupied for a prolonged period of time. But the savagery which they carried out, the killing of teachers, of health workers, of anyone associated with the government, was devastating. The total effect upon our region, the economic destruction, was proportionally greater than that inflicted upon Great Britain during the Second World War. The Reagan administration used everything. If we built a school, the school was destroyed. We built a clinic, the clinic was destroyed. The people working in the clinic became targets. The people working in the schools became targets. We gave land to the landless. Those who received that land became targets. If you provided them with a tractor and seeds, the tractor became a target. But in spite of this savage destruction, during the time we were in power, for the first time in the history of Nicaragua, it was Nicaraguans who were deciding what was going to be done in our own home. This was important, and in that respect, what we achieved over those 11 years is a source of inspiration to Latin Americans who insist that it is we, the Latin Americans, it is we, the people of the Caribbean, of the different countries of the Caribbean, who must constantly insist that we should decide what's to be done in our own home. If we don't decide what's to be done in our own home, we don't have a home. We are homeless. We are identityless.
What lesson, what profound lesson would you say the Sandinistas would have learned from this experience?
What, you see, because of the war inflicted against us, against our will, we had to spend financial resources upon military expenditures which we did not have. In 1979, 1980, before Mr. Reagan took over the economy, we were spending, I think it was less than 10% of our national budget on military expenditure. By 1986, we had reached a point where we were spending more than 50% of our annual national budget on military expenditure. When you are forced to spend so much on the military, obviously you have less for economic development, for the building of schools, for health clinics and other health programs. And it is the economic development program, the health clinics, the schools, the social programs which generate popular support for any government. What was impressive, I would say, is that in spite of everything which the United States did, 41% of the people of Nicaragua voted for the Frente Sandinista in honest, fair, free elections. The first honest, fair election to be held in all our history. That is, 41% voted against their stomach. They voted for self-determination.
To look at the state of the economy at the time of the election, the last elections, and there are some statistics here that I would like to quote to you. Over the last 3 years period, gross domestic product declined 11.7%, a per capita drop of 21.5%. The trade balance showed a deficit of 1.2 billion, and the balance of payments was a negative 2 billion, and in 1989, foreign debt amounted to over 7.5 billion. That's an awesome amount of money in terms of repayment. How will the Chamorro government survive this?
You know, it's not an awesome amount of money or of economic indicators. When one compares the situation in Nicaragua with revolutions which took place in other places, other times, what you find is that whenever there is a revolution, there is an economic deterioration in the country as a whole. No revolutionary movement has been an exception to this. In the case of the United States, for example, in their revolution between 1776, when the military struggle started, and 1789, when General George Washington became the first president of the United States. You had a period of approximately 13 years in which the economic situation in that country deteriorated, and it deteriorated drastically. The inflation rate was rampant between 1782 and 1789. They didn't know what to do, and they did not have the mightiest military power committed to their destruction. When you look at the French Revolution, for example, you'll find that during that revolutionary process, there was an economic deterioration of the situation. Whenever there has been an economic revolutionary program being tried to put into effect, there has been an economic deterioration. What was important is that the economic downfall was not more. You know, in Nicaragua right now, the economic situation is worse than it was when the Chamorro government took over. And all objective observers are in agreement on that. It's worse.
Will the coalition last? The Chamorro coalition, will it last?
The divisions within the governing coalition has intensified. It would seem as if the differences between the Vice President Virgilio Godoy and Mrs. Chamorro is now irreconcilable. The Vice President is doing everything to hasten Mrs. Chamorro's departure from power. Mrs. Chamorro seems to want to remain in power.
Will she last her full term in office?
It's difficult to say. It would seem as if the Vice President will not be successful in forcing her out of power if he doesn't get total support from sectors within the United States administration.
The Sandinistas, you find yourself now in the opposition, the role of the opposition. What are some of the fundamental changes, I would assume, that the organization is going through presently in its new role as the opposition?
You know, it's not the first time the Sandinistas have been in opposition. Before the overthrow of Somoza, our life was one of opposition. But being in the opposition is more fun. Definitely more fun than being in government. But aside from that, the Frente Sandinista is going through a very impressive process, a fascinating process. It's a process of self-evaluation, a process of revitalization, a process of democratization. These are efforts we would have put into effect even before